Hi, everybody. Welcome and good evening. My name is Zinat Rahman. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Politics. We are so pleased to welcome you today to a discussion regarding a breakdown of this year's election results and a preview of the 2022 midterm elections. Before one of our students formally introduces our guest in a few minutes, I want to mention a few upcoming events that we have because we're going strong into the end of the quarter. So tomorrow, Thursday, November 11th, Eric Garcia, who's a journalist and author of We're Not Broken, Changing the Autism Conversation, and former IOP Pritzker Fellow Tim Alberta, who's a staff writer for The Atlantic, will be joining us to discuss the research and misperceptions surrounding autism and other disabilities, along with the craft of writing in their journalism careers. On Monday, November 15th, we have two events. So at 10:30 in the morning, please join us for a live taping of the Axe Files with David Axelrod in conversation with Representative Pramila Jayapal, who, as you all know, is the chair of the House Progressive Caucus. At 5:30 that same day, on Monday, I'll be moderating a discussion with Huma Abedin, who's a top aide and longtime advisor to Hillary Clinton. And she'll be joining us to discuss her career in national politics and her new memoir, Both and A Life in Many Worlds. After the moderated discussion, we'll open the floor to take questions from you all in the audience. Please line up to ask your questions. And as usual, we'll give priority first to student questions. Please make sure your phones are on silent, and we will now hear formal introductions of our speakers from Adam Zabner. Adam is a fourth-year neuroscience major from Iowa City, Iowa. Through the IOP's Iowa Project, Adam worked as an organizer for Pete Buttigieg's 2020 caucus campaign, after which he became the regional organizing director for Northwest Iowa in the 2020 Iowa Democratic Party coordinated campaign. It's a mouthful. After the 2020 election, Adam worked on John Ossoff's runoff campaign in Georgia for the U.S. Senate. Please join me in welcoming Adam to the podium.
Hi, it's an honor to introduce the speakers for today's event, titled Speaker McCarthy, Looking Ahead to the 2022 Midterms. Today's speakers are two of the most successful pollsters in the country and have helped presidents navigate a moment of upheaval, both in the electorate and in the way that polling is conducted. Tony Fabrizio is an IOP fellow and served as the chief pollster for President Donald Trump's campaigns in 2016 and 2020. This quarter, he has been leading a seminar series teaching students about the state of the Republican Party and the trends in today's electorate. He has also worked internationally for candidates like Marine Le Pen and Bibi Netanyahu, and also with corporate clients. John Anzalone, who was a field organizer in Iowa for Joe Biden's 1988 campaign, is now the chief pollster for President Joe Biden, proving my theory that organizers run the world. He also polled for Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, along with numerous candidates for Senate, governor, and Congress. He has done work with corporations, nonprofits, advocacy groups, and trade associations. Today's conversation will be moderated by IOP Advisory Board member and former fellow Karen Tumulty. She is deputy editorial page editor and columnist for the Washington Post. She recently released a book on First Lady Nancy Reagan titled The Triumph of Nancy Reagan. Please join me in welcoming today's speakers.
Thank you so much, Adam. And after hearing your experience, I'm halfway thinking we ought to invite you to just pull a chair on the stage. I'm so delighted to be here tonight, and thank you so much for coming out. This place is so special to me, and of course, as a political reporter, there's nothing you enjoy more than talking to people who are doing it and who are really at the top of their game, which is why we are doubly lucky tonight. And the timing of this event was sheer perfection.
For some people. I have no complaints.
So we're looking ahead tonight, but we can't look ahead without looking back a week. I think that as Election Day was rolling around, it was possible to anticipate what was going to happen in Virginia. If either of you tells me you expected how close it was in New Jersey, I'm going to make you prove it. But there was also just across the map, from local elections in Long Island to local elections in Seattle and Minneapolis. So Anzo, what do you take away from all of this?
Well, I mean, the big takeaway is that Democrats got their ass kicked. I mean, that, right? I mean, and we should, like, you know, I always say when you go through a big beating, the first thing is don't deny it, right? I mean, you have to, like, own it and say DEFCON 10 and, you know, understand that you have to figure out why. I think that, you know, we talked about this last night. A lot of this is atmospheric.
These guys talked about it last night.
Yeah, right. I mean, a lot of it, listen, is atmospherics, right? I mean, we are in a bad political environment, we're in a bad economic environment, and we're still in the 20th month of a pandemic. That's not excuses for what happened, but understand that if you go back in time and you Google midterm elections, right, or these off-year elections, you're going to see the same thing happen to Carter. You're going to see the same thing happen to Reagan, Obama, you know, Bush, et cetera. In Trump, right, in 18. So, I mean, most of them are economic. Some of them, like W. Bush, was more about the Iraq War. For Trump, it was more about this kind of distaste that, you know, suburban women had for him once he became president. But the fact is that historically, this is not unusual. The difference is that, again, whether you believe it or not, is that President Joe Biden, in modern history, has had more challenges than just about any other president's had. We're in the 20th month of a pandemic. Psychologically, there was always anxiety about it happening again, and guess what? It happened again with Delta. You have supply chain problems. You have inflation because of pent-up demand in supply chain. You have work shortages. You had Afghanistan. You had the Haitian border. I mean, you can go on. And we went through 2.5 months of literally slog of the process of trying to get something done, which was really bad, because if you're talking process, you're losing. So the atmospherics were really, really bad. And you can talk about what percentage is atmospherics and bad political and economic environment versus, you know, whether Terry McAuliffe owned 30 or 40% of his loss, but you can't avoid New Jersey. No. You can't avoid some of these other places where, again, the political environment and economic environment, and again, psychologically, the pandemic environment of fatigue just is going to hurt the person who's president of the United States or the party, whether it's a Democrat or Republican.
The environment. This isn't any mistake.
So this is the second part. The second
environment.
part of it is don't misdiagnose. So you have to make sure that, again, you don't misdiagnose whether or not, oh, is this just a messaging problem, et cetera. And maybe we can talk about messaging a little later on in it, because I think that Democrats actually have the potential and the tools in the toolkit for 2022, but there's only one silver lining about the elections in 2021, and that is it's not 2022. And so we have 1 year to figure out and diagnose and talk about what the way is or the path forward. Because usually the path forward when you're in a situation is not to get your ass kicked again, it's to have just a not so bad night. There's a big difference between that and be competitive. And I think that we can be competitive, and I'll outline that, but maybe, you know, Tony wants to talk about some of the other things as well.
First rule, when you're in a hole, stop digging.
Yeah.
And that's something that the Democrats have to learn, but it's not only the Democrats. We fall to the same problem when it happens to us, oftentimes. And Karen, I will challenge you on New Jersey. I did.
You've got proof?
You got it right.
I released a survey in early September that had Chitterelli losing by 1 to Murphy.
Wow.
And not only that, but there was private polling internal to the campaign that had the race within 2 or 3 the whole last 2 months. And you talk about what happened on Long Island. I'm from there, and I was deeply involved in knocking off a Democrat incumbent DA and taking back a county legislature that they hadn't had for 12 years. So it's hard to look at the results and not understand that what happened, and we saw it happening early on, to get into the weeds a little bit, was there was an increased surge, if you will, among Republican voters But the bigger thing is that we saw a collapse of President Biden's numbers with independents.
Right.
And that was really the turning point in a number of these races. When we were looking at New Jersey or Virginia, and we saw Biden's numbers go from being +5 or +6 with independents to being down 10, that shift really shook the foundations of how those elections were going to go. I think one of the problems that both parties suffer from is they misread what happened in the previous election.
Right.
And they overplay their hand. They think when they got elected, it was a massive mandate to do certain things. And I disagree with John, and I told him that we'll be nice to each other tonight. I disagree with him in that while I do think that anything is possible in politics, I think it is going to be even more difficult now for the Democrats to break out of their funk of the fighting between the more moderate members from marginal districts and the progressives, because, and I understand they passed the infrastructure bill, but the next piece is even tougher. And I think that next piece could very well be even more problematic for them, because it's not just what people think of the bill overall, and there is some data that's come out lately that's shown this, that people have mixed opinions about whether or not that next spending bill is actually going to help them or hurt them. And if it flips to the hurt side, and it flips to the hurt side big, we've kind of seen this, when they told the Democrats in 2009, pass Obamacare, and in 2010, we'll be giving all this stuff away, and that didn't kind of work. So
but here's the
it
big
worked
difference.
different.
But here's the big difference. The fact is that in 2009, the last, in 10, we got our butts kicked too. In 2009, immediately, ACA, Obamacare, was underwater. Net negative in approval rating. Bad. And it only got worse, because then you remember when it went online, it crashed. And so there was an incompetence problem too. The fact is, during the entire debate of building back together, or whatever you want to call it, the numbers have never moved. Not only is it 60% in terms of approval rating, all the individual components have way above 60% approval. So we talk about the third part of when you have this type of election. Don't despair, but do something, right? You have to have a message. And that's why I don't want to misdiagnose, right? Because we'll have the ultra-left in our party wanting to say, well, if you would have just been more liberal and more progressive, and if you would have just defunded police, and if you would have been more woke, et cetera, it would have all worked out right. Well, the fact is this. When I talk about the toolkit, we have, and we're about, and again, the 2.5 months has been brutal. The process is brutal. People expected us to get something done, and we didn't get it done. We'll get it done, and at that point in time, we're going to have something that we can talk about in the 2022 elections that are impactful for people. And by the way, none of this is stuff that people think is social spending or, entitlements, et cetera. It's stuff that they think is going to help them. It's going to lower insurance premiums. It's going to lower the cost of prescription drugs. It's going to help them with child care. It's going to help them with elder care, which is huge. In some sectors, it's going to help people with
But they're not going to feel it by November.
Let me just tell you. But once there's going to be $7 billion spent in the midterm elections. By the time what my point is that we are going to be able to communicate about what we've done. But more importantly, we're going to be able to communicate, because not one Republican is going to vote for any of that. So every frontline Democrat who's out there, or candidate for Senate, is going to be able to say, the Republicans voted against lowering costs for healthcare premiums, voted against lowering the cost of prescription drugs, elderly care, da-da-da-da-da. Why? To protect those at the top in big corporations. The fact is that we have a message. And I think we will have a very strong message, because the one misdiagnosis is that somehow people are loving Republicans. The fact is, you always default to the party that's not in charge. The Republican Party has worse numbers than the Democratic Party, and their leaders have worse numbers than Joe Biden. Now, we're getting our butt kicked because of the atmospherics. I get it, and maybe miscues on certain things that happen in each state. But we shouldn't get in disarray, and we shouldn't forget the fact that we have a really potential strong message in 2022.
But right,
Do I get my rebuttal?
yes, absolutely.
But I was
Yeah.
rebuttaling to you. What do you call it? Is it a rebuttal to what, a rebuttal?
This is a rebuttal.
Okay.
All
right.
So look, I do not doubt that somewhere at the White House there is this long list of beautiful things that you're going to tell the voters about what this plan does and what this plan doesn't do. The problem is that the seeds of doubt have already been planted. And not only have the seeds of doubt already been planted, but as I said, we've got a problem that's called inflation. And while you may understand it to be a supply chain problem, the average person doesn't care about supply chain.
I agree.
They care about what happens when they go to their grocery store to buy a turkey, what happens when they go to get gas, what happens with all of these things, housing prices just exploding through the roof. And so the real question is going to become, can you make a credible, what is easier to do? To make the argument that all of this government spending is only fueling the inflation and the inflationary spiral that we're in, or we need to spend our way out of inflation?
And let's say today we had inflation numbers.
6.2%?
It's
31
1
years.
month,
Right.
but it is the worst in
30
years. And people are already arguing that to drop a gigantic load of government spending into the middle of this environment, and even, especially since there are people on the Hill arguing we shouldn't even bother with a CBO score, how are you going to fight that?
3 things. First of all, you notice that he did a head fake. He didn't respond to the strong message that the Democrats have, and he didn't respond to that we're going to kick Republicans' asses because they're going to vote for all this stuff that is impactful for working families. That you went, you curveball to inflation. You curveball to inflation,
Because
Tony.
that's what voters care about. They don't
Voters
care about
care about inflation
wanna
today
build back their wallets.
in November of 2021. Here's the thing that they always hope for, is that the political and economic environment stays the same. But if we came back here, if you invite us back here in September or October of 2022, who thinks the economic and political environment is going to be the same? That's the thing. Now, I'm not counting on that, right? But the fact is that I will take our message of what we are going to do for people that's going to be real, and what they didn't do for people and why they didn't do it, over this hypothetical that inflation is going to be as bad in October of 2022. Now, listen, I don't know it. Inflation's real, no head in the sand. I mean, the fact is that the psychological impact of inflation is the driver of people's perception of the economy. That's real. I understand that. And every day, the Biden administration is trying to do things on supply chain and ports and all that type of stuff. And I think we would probably both agree that a lot of it has to work itself out within the business and economic cycles. It does.
You bought it.
We pay for it,
But
right?
wait,
We're paying for Donald Trump's $6.7 trillion worth of spending in his administration. That was my curveball,
Wait a
right?
second.
I mean, that was my third point. That was my third point.
Can I take this back?
You better
Okay.
get control of this,
Yes,
Karen.
exactly. So there were a couple of things that also. Okay, one is the assumption among Democrats has been, and I think it was shattered in Virginia, that high turnout benefits the Democrats. That, I think, is gone. The second assumption is, political scientists love to argue that candidate quality doesn't matter. I think Glenn Youngkin disproved that. But how your client-in-chief is going to want to be intervening in a lot of primaries. He stayed away from Virginia, but there's a lot of score settling going on with Trump. How worried are you about primaries that produce the kind of some of the offbeat candidates that we've seen?
Offbeat?
I'm looking for a nice word.
I think that first, we can't dispute that Donald Trump is still a major force inside the Republican Party. You can't dispute that. He's sitting there with $150+ million in his accounts.
And a lot of scores against Republicans he wants to
and
sell.
he does,
Including
and he
Mitch
does,
McConnell.
and he does. Which, interestingly enough, Mitch McConnell came around and endorsed Herschel Walker today.
Yeah.
After basically trying to sabotage him through his minions before he got into the race. So it's interesting to see McConnell basically bow to what Trump wants. There's no question that he's going to make endorsements, and some of those endorsements are not going to pan out. And it's going to be a situation where we're not going to always nominate the best person. It's not going to be like 2014, where it was a much more controlled process, because after 2010, if you remember, with the Tea Party, you know, the party leadership went about trying to control that process. But
After I am not a witch.
yeah, right. After I am not a witch, right. But I do think what is going to happen is I think we have so many competitive races that the playing field is such that if we don't get the right candidate, or what is perceived to be the right candidate in a race or two, the options for us to still take back the House and take back the Senate are plentiful. And it's not going to be every place where he plays, and it's not going to be every place where he picks somebody that is, you know, unelectable. For example, you talk John's home state, Alabama, okay? Mo Brooks, the former president's endorsed Mo Brooks. Can Mo Brooks win statewide in Alabama? Yes, Mo Brooks can win statewide in Alabama. Okay?
Right, but can Ted Bunn win in North Carolina? Right. I mean, that's the reality of what this is all about. 2010.
I don't know.
I mean, a lot of
Tom Tillis was dead in North Carolina until he wasn't dead in North Carolina.
But the point.
Well, I mean, let's face it, there was some situational stuff going on in North Carolina, including
And there might
a
be this
nominee
time,
who had
too.
some unfortunate
might be this
text
time.
The
messages.
most entertaining season of 2022 isn't going to be baseball, football, basketball. It's going to be the Republican primaries. Because in 2010, which you was alluding to, we got Sharon Angle against Harry Reid, and Harry Reid should have lost, and we won. We got the witch Christine O'Donnell in Delaware, who, you know,
She was not a witch.
Right, hold on, Murdoch in Indiana,
But
and
we
Aiken.
still won the House and took over
Well,
a
that's
majority
fine,
of
but
governors.
the point is that you should have taken it over that year and you didn't.
Well.
And these things do, like candidates do matter. I mean,
They
there's
do.
no doubt about it.
They do.
And the fact is that the Democrats are probably going to have some competitive races that they shouldn't have because of that. And it puts us in a more competitive state. But I also want to go to your original question about Virginia. Because I do think that when you get your butt beat, there should be lessons learned, right? You asked that. And the fact is that in 2017, we had historic off-year election turnout everywhere. It doesn't matter whether you were in the mayor of Cincinnati, we had double the turnout because people were so pissed off about what they saw in Trump. They thought, oh, we're going to give this guy a try, and then he turned out not to be, you know, who he was or what they thought. They thought he was going to be presidential. I mean, we saw this in focus groups. Women were particularly disgusted with him, and you saw what happened, right? And so you never could have imagined that there was going to be bigger turnout than 17 in Virginia, where Northam won, in 21. And everyone was wrong. And there was. And so you learned that you have to persuade. Because what Tony was talking about with independent voters, in 2006, to give you an example, Democrats won independent voters 60-40. Guess what? In 2010, Republicans won at 60-40. There is still a middle out there, and you have to persuade them. Because even though Terry McAuliffe got 200,000 more votes than Northam, the previous guy who won, there was something like 600,000 more people who came out. 26% bigger turnout than 17, which was a historic turnout. You can't out-mobilize the organization. That's my point. I think we're agreeing on that.
Yes, but you also have to look at what the turnout was. And candidate quality does matter, but I would argue that while all the attention was on Youngkin, and I am not, by any stretch of the imagination, belittling the campaign that Youngkin ran. They ran a very good campaign, and McAuliffe ran a crappy campaign, particularly the last 3 weeks. He never offered a reason why he should be governor again, and he was the functional incumbent, having served in that, right, you know, in that role before. But if you look at the turnout, according to the exit polls, and John and I both have our private feelings about exit polls, but if you look at the exit polls, the turnout in Virginia was whiter, less college educated, older, less conservative, and less Democrat, considerably across the board than it was in 2017. So it wasn't just the flip of independents that made the difference.
It was who turned out.
It was who turned out. And, you know, the fact of the matter is that even though more Democrats turned out, there was considerably more Republicans that turned out. And that, in 2018, one of the things we saw in our polling, and I'm sure John saw it as well, we were doing a bunch of work for CLF, Congressional Leadership Fund, probably did 35, 40 districts for them in that year, where we took a bloodbath. And one of the things that we noticed—
CLF, let's explain.
Congressional Leadership Fund.
But it is the super PAC that's associated with the House Republican leadership.
And at the time, Ryan was the speaker, and it was his it was basically his super PAC. And one of the things we do when we do our polling, not to get too deep into the weeds, is we do it among known registered voters. So we know your vote history. When you take that survey, we know whether you voted or not. And one of the things that consistently coming back is that there was anywhere between 20 and 30% of the sample, not of the entire electorate, but of the sample that screened in, that had never voted in a midterm election before that said they were voting. When you looked at typical midterm voters, Republicans were winning them by a point or two generally. When you looked at that 20 to 30%, Democrats were winning them by double digits. And in a lot of these districts, that made the difference, that flip.
And the opposite happened in 17.
That's right. The question is now, what happens in 2022, where I will tell you, say what you want about Donald Trump, and I know everybody in this room has an opinion of Donald Trump.
He
Some of you,
brings
many
people
of them.
out, man.
Yeah, that's right.
He brings people out.
He does, there's a lot of two-edged sword with him, but one of the things he does is every election that he has been on the national stage for, turnout has increased and continues to increase. And so, you know, everybody in Virginia, you had a 600,000 vote increase. In New Jersey, they had almost a 500,000 vote increase, and it wasn't even as focused on as it was in Virginia.
So, and can we just, I think to connect the dots in Virginia, Terry McAuliffe's entire campaign was trying to paint Youngkin, Glenn Youngkin, as a Trumpite. The problem is, at the end of the day, 20% of the people who voted for Youngkin had a disapproval of Trump. Why? I've been watching a bunch of focus groups of Biden-Youngkin voters, because they said, well, this guy is a guy who you'd see on a Saturday at a soccer game. He wasn't Trump.
Okay, so you're thinking you're going to have a set of accomplishments to sell. But how are Democrats going to play defense on some of the issues that we saw in Virginia? Critical race theory has become, you know, it's a code phrase, and yes, we can talk about it's not in the curriculum for third graders in Virginia, but it struck a resonance. McAuliffe didn't seem to understand.
Well, I mean,
how are you going to defend?
But that's not the only thing.
It wasn't
about
like
the border and immigration.
And immigration and all of these.
Two things.
We know the playbook. How are you going to defend?
We got things that we want to do for people, and they use wedge issues. And you know what? Wedge issues sometimes wins over impactful things for people.
Wins a lot.
The playbook is Joe Biden for president 2020, right? They hit us on defunding police. Joe Biden said, I don't believe in defunding police. We're going to he actually had a plan to increase funding for police. They said, you're going to raise taxes? No, not true. It's a lie. I'm only going to raise taxes on people over $400,000. You know, every time you got to knock it down. Now, the problem in Virginia wasn't just critical race theory. It was that the candidate himself in a debate said, I don't think that parents should have a say in what teachers teach. That was a problem. That is a value statement. You lost people there. Men, women, everyone, right? Rural, you know, Democrats, independents, et cetera. That was a big problem. But critical race theory, I mean, I think that if you're smart, you don't say, well, critical race theory isn't taught anywhere in public schools. No, I'm against critical race theory. And then you explain the importance of teaching things like slavery and civil rights and lynching, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact is,
But
if
how,
you want to,
how do you deal with the left of your own party on that then?
Hey, man, you know, how did Joe Biden deal with the left? The fact is that he disagreed on defunding. He disagreed on fracking. He disagreed on a lot of things with the left. But the fact is, he became president of the United States. And, you know, there's going to be disagreements. But if you're a frontline Democrat, you know, you're going to have to take some stands that maybe you're going to take some heat for.
I would argue, my dear friend and colleague.
Or you're giving advice for Democrats?
I'm going to give, and then I'm going to send the bill over to DNC headquarters. I would argue that the divisions in the Democratic Party during the 2020 election and during the 2020 primary process to nominate Joe Biden were covered or papered over because there was one thing that united Democrats more than anything else.
Donald Trump.
Their absolute hate and just loathing of Donald Trump. So while, you know, AOC and, I don't know, the congressman from New Jersey, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, the moderate guy, Gottheimer, may not agree on anything, they do agree that Donald Trump should not be president. So I think a lot of it was kind of papered over, but now what's happened that you guys have to actually govern, and what's happening is, I thought President Biden made one of the truest statements in the world when he said, when you have a 50-50 Senate, every senator is a president. I thought it was so funny, and it was so accurate. But the problem you have is, the AOCs of the world are not going away. They're not going anywhere.
Well, neither are the Joe Manchins.
Right. Well, but then that creates a problem for how you get all these things you want to get passed done. And, you know, it's, and how you get Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema to go along with it, or how do you get, you're not going to get the 13 Republicans that are going to vote for you. We
got to live in reality, okay? The Democratic caucus is not like the Republican caucus. The Democratic caucus does not look like a country club board of directors.
Oh,
right?
trust me,
I
our
would
caucus
say the
does not look like a
Republican
country
doesn't
club.
either.
I'm just saying, the fact is that we have an incredibly diverse, ideologically, demographically, gender, et cetera, religiously, et cetera. And you know, the fact is, the process is pretty damn messy, and it has hurt us. I'll be the first one to say that. But we're going to get some really important stuff done. And getting stuff done is important. It's going to be really impactful stuff as well. You're going to have to deal with that, not now, not in the first quarter or the second quarter, but come the third and fourth quarter of the year. You guys are going to have to deal with the fact that you don't have anything to run.
I hope you guys have plans for what you're going to do about the border and what you're going to do about how we're perceived abroad, or about what you're going to do about how voters have lost confidence in Biden's ability to govern, not his ability to understand government, but the perception that Biden may not be up to the job of governing, or that the party, your party, while they may not like our party, what's happened over the last few months hasn't certainly helped the image of the Democratic Party. It certainly has not. So, I mean, let's you know.
No, listen, challenge. I don't disagree with any of that. But the fact is, where I think you guys are going to get overconfident, hyper-confident, is the fact that this is a done deal. I'll take that any day.
I never doubt our ability to pull defeat out of the jaws of victory.
I will take that every day. But the thing is, one other thing that he said.
I never doubt
the fact that Joe Biden ran against literally 13 other liberals made him stronger. And the fact is that moderates, or pragmatic moderates to pragmatic liberals, still dominate the Democratic Party. And the fact is that what happens in D.C. in the bubble is not real America.
Oh, I agree with you 100%.
And if as a party, we only kowtow to that side of it, then we're going to have some real problems.
I'd also like to sort of come over to your party here, because
please.
Okay.
So you want to join? You want to join the Republican Party?
So
that'd be big news tomorrow.
But okay, the Republican Party is now in a position where I think Jim Jordan's in the mainstream. Donald Trump has convinced most Republicans that the election was massive fraud, that he was actually elected, which is a lie.
He did convince them. He has convinced them.
He has convinced him of that, but it is not in keeping with reality. So we're going to go into this next election with a lot of people really doubting the integrity of whatever the results are.
Well, I think
Unless a Republican wins.
Unless a Republican.
Like Youngkin.
But, you know, I would love to agree with your statement that that's going to impact the turnout. But the fact of the matter is that we saw turnout, particularly Republican turnout, in both New Jersey and Virginia increase by more than Democrats.
I'm not even thinking how it impacts turnout. I'm thinking how it impacts democracy. How it if we have reached the point where a significant portion of our population doesn't trust the people who have run our elections and done a pretty good job of it for our, most of our history.
I think there's, first of all, I think there's, I don't want to parse this, but I think there's a gradation of what people think, okay? And I think even within the Republican Party, there's a gradation of what they think. And we've surveyed this, and I presented them in my seminars about what Republicans thought about the election. But the closer we get to 22, and the prospect of having electoral successes, having the electoral success we did in Virginia, having the close call that we did in New Jersey, I think actually helps move this down the road. Now, will President Trump stop talking about it? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball.
He's not going to stop talking about
well,
it.
but at some point, once you get past 2022, you know what I'm saying? It's you're now on to the next election.
So can I do another lesson of the 2021 elections, which kind of goes to this, is that big turnout, Republicans shouldn't fear big turnout, which means what? They shouldn't fear making it as easy as possible for people to friggin' vote. The fact is that because Virginia was blue, meaning that there was a Democratic governor and Democratic legislature, mail-in voting was easy, early voting in early voting places, early voting times, et cetera. You shouldn't be afraid of it. The fact is that in New Jersey and Virginia, if you do it in Georgia and all these other places that you're so worried that you're stopping people, putting impediments for people to vote, whether it's by mail or by early voting, you really have no worry about it. You really have no worry about it.
We're not. Listen.
You're impeding. If you're limiting the number of early voting places in a place like North Carolina, where I do the governor, there was a lot of them. Now there's a few of them. If you're not going to let the mail-in boxes, if you're going to limit the number of days, if you're going to limit the number of hours for early vote, that is an impediment for people.
But you're making an argument here. We know what is actually happening, and how do the Democrats have a strategy for anywhere there's a close election that the Democrat comes out ahead? You're going to have swarms of people looking for bamboo fibers.
No. Listen, we've always had. Listen, both sides have always done a great job of having election people there watching. And immediately there's a broken machine. You call it all that type of stuff happens.
EDO.
And people don't trust that. Republicans don't trust that anymore.
I don't know how to answer that. I don't know how to answer how they act and what they're trying to do to put not only impediments on voting, but really impediments on the election. Were there profile encouraged Republicans out there? Yes. The Secretary of State in Georgia is a guy who deserves a lot of accolades about how he stood up to Trump. There's videotape of it, right? There's probably going to be lawsuits about it. There were 60 different judges who ruled against the Trump organization about the legitimacy of the election. I don't think there was one that didn't. So, the fact is that that's going to, at the end of the day, rule how the outcome.
I would just make the following observation. In states where there had already been a number of states, I don't know if you know this, but a number of states already had robust mail ballot programs for years. Okay? Florida for one of them, Arizona, Ohio, Colorado is all vote by mail. I mean, there are certain states that are all vote by mail at all. They just mail everybody ballots. I think the thing that helped prod along the whole theory, if you will, of what happened was there were a number of states where this was not used to being done, and it was being done under the guise of COVID and because people didn't want to vote. And one of the things that happened was by President Trump attacking mail voting before it ever happened, it polarized who would vote by mail. And it pushed Republicans from being mail-in voters in these other states or early voters to being election day voters, and Democrats to being mail-in voters and early voters. And one of the things that we saw, and I'm sure you saw it as well as I did in our surveys, was it was very easy to see how on election night there would be a red mirage where it would look like, you know, because you'd build up on the election day votes such a huge margin, but you knew that there was still a couple of million mail-in ballots that were going to be counted, and they were going to break 2 to 1, sometimes 3 to 1 for the Democrat because of the people who voted. We saw consistently that Democrats were more fearful of COVID than Republicans, and they were more fearful of voting in person than Republicans were. So that's a unique set of circumstances that hopefully we never have to face again, where we don't have people unsure about how the mail-in ballots worked or unknowing that there were 3 million mail-in ballots that were cast. More and more people will take advantage of that as time goes on, and hopefully we move.
Well, but the problem is that in a place like Georgia, where it worked beautifully, except for the fact that Biden won it and 2 Democratic senators won, the Republican legislature and the Republican governor decided, okay, you know, it worked beautifully, but let's put impediments on it. Let's make sure that, you know, all these different things. Oh, you got to have a notary public, or you got to, you know, fax in this, or you got to have this. You get all these different things. You're changing the rules on what worked. That's what's happening.
If what you mean by requiring people to show ID,
we're for ID. Don't do that.
No, you guys are not
Stacey
for
Abrams.
ID.
Stacey
That's
Abrams.
not true.
Stacey Abrams in
please
Georgia
do not
has
quote,
said, I am for.
Stacey Abrams to me.
But don't hide behind ID. We're for. Most people are for an ID.
Yes, most people are for
Right.
ID.
But
the Democratic Party is not for ID.
That's not the new rules that's going to change the rules in Georgia. I mean, there's like 15 or 20 different new rules, including, by heaven forbid, someone give someone a bottle of water while they stand in the line.
Come on, you should
Okay.
die of thirst while you're trying to vote.
Okay, wait, reclaiming my time.
All right.
One last question.
Thank you for joining us, Kevin.
One last question before we go to your questions, which we are very much looking forward to. What about the perception of Biden articulated this week by Abigail Spanberger, that this gigantic, massive program that the Democrats are trying to get through on Capitol Hill is not what Biden was elected to do. As she said, we didn't think we were, people didn't think they were electing FDR.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a great question, except for 90% of Joe Biden's TV ads, digital ads, and mail outlined his Build Back Better program, and we outlined all of it, including a much bigger price tag and how we were going to pay for it, so it wasn't going to raise the national debt. So I love her. She's great, and she's reacting to, you know, her governor or her candidate getting beat in Virginia. But the fact is that Joe Biden did one singular thing, two things in the election. He said he's going to get control of COVID, right, get a handle on it. And the second is he laid out everything that is in reconciliation or Build Back Together, whatever you want to call it. I mean, we did hundreds of millions of dollars worth of TV. Voters knew exactly what he was. Matter of fact, voters told us that they wanted to know what he was going to do, and he laid out exactly what he was going to do. And guess what? He's going to get part of it passed.
So, Tony, has he been dragged to the left by his party?
Oh, absolutely. A. B, you know, with all due respect, my friend.
Okay, but
with all due respect, my friend, you know, we talk about this 7 million vote margin that Joe Biden had, when in fact, we elect presidents by the Electoral College. And in the Electoral College, yes, he did. Yeah. He did. But for the want of 47,000 votes, the Electoral College would have looked much differently.
So?
My point being is to say that those states were decided based on his future Build Back Better plan.
It was.
When, in fact, arguably, and not only arguably, you look at the exit poll data, you can see that coronavirus, COVID, had a much bigger impact in those states that flipped than the states that didn't flip, is to misread it.
Hold on. Listen, is part of the reason Joe Biden is president because your guy failed in his job on coronavirus? Abso-friggin-lutely. I'll lay that down there.
Will that be the same excuse why you guys lose in 2022? Because he failed to get it under control?
The question was about Abigail. And I think it's absolutely unfair to say that voters didn't know what Joe Biden wanted to do when 90% of our ads was laying out his Build Back Better program. And the fact is that you can ask, is Joe Biden getting more liberal? People talk about social spending and stuff like that. If you're a working family, right, and you're getting your insurance premiums cut, or prescription drugs cut, or some help with some child care or elder care, allow me to suggest none of those working families think that that's liberal policy. None of those families think that it's entitlement. None of those families think it's handout. What they think is that they've been working their asses off and they have not been able to get any benefit from the economy. That's what they felt pre-pandemic, and now that I believe they're going to feel that they have an opportunity to succeed in this economy because of these type of things. And the fact is that we can knock them down to say because of the political and economic environment now, but these are real things that will help people. Will it save us in 2022? I don't know, Tony. I really don't know. But the fact is that it was laid out in his campaign, and I think it's a miscue by her to say that.
Okay, I'll give you your rebuttal, but I also just want to point out, we have a microphone set up right there, and so if you guys have better questions than I do, please line up. Go ahead, Tony.
I don't. There's a lot of people lining up.
I figured this is what we were going to see.
Well, I think only time will tell what's going to happen in 2020.
Oh, what a wimp out
No,
here.
but look, I've already said what I believe. I don't think any of this is really going to help them. I think that you're going to be able to describe all of these things that you're going to do, and it's going to make people. I mean, you just look at the trends and what's happened. White, non-college educated voters continue to move to the Republican Party. Those are the voters that you're trying to target to get back. And what's happening is there's a values fight going on that critical race theory may engender, but it's broader than that. And people think that mask mandates and vaccine mandates are all about, whether I want to wear a mask or not. What's happened is there's been a revolt about you telling me what I can and cannot do. And it's that type of values type of fight that is going to be the underlying problem that you guys face in 2022, not some academic argument about whether or not I put $5 more in your pocket.
I agree with the psychological fatigue that people have. I agree with all of that. That is benefiting you, even though it has nothing really to do with us. Right. Well, but the point is that if you're counting on that to still be there, when the bell rings in September.
You guys will make it there.
Okay, we'll move on to the questions. Can I just ask a couple of things? One is, please identify yourself, and so that we can get through as many questions as possible, please put your question in the form of a question.
Hey, good evening. Thanks for coming. Alex, University of Chicago, Booth School of Business. As a dissatisfied, moderate, self-identified, moderate, independent, dissatisfied Biden voter who feels like he caved to the left, and I don't know, I didn't know much about what Joe Biden stood for, and polling data seems to be like, how do you answer? All the polling data I've seen is people don't know what's in the Build Back Better program. They don't know what it's for, what it is, and how do you think people actually like something they don't know about?
Yeah, that is a challenge, brother. I mean, you've hit it on the head. The fact is that when you go through this process and you're just counting on, quite frankly, free press, it's really difficult. And quite frankly, that's what campaigns are about. right? I mean, at the beginning of when Joe Biden started his presidential campaign, no one knew what he wanted to do when he was president, right? And we spent a couple $100 million. The fact is that whether we like it or not, is there going to be like $6 or $7 billion spent on campaigns in 1 year, right? And that is incumbent upon a Democrat or a Republican to get their message out and to explain that very thing, which is, here's what's in that bill, here's what we've done for you, and here's how it's going to impact you. That is the absolute challenge. You've hit it on the head right there. Nothing easy about it either, by the way.
Hi, Annie Henderson from the Harris School of Public Policy. So we have a unique year coming up, not just because you both are here together speaking to us, but because of redistricting. And so I'm curious, how does redistricting play into your thinking?
He's smiling,
I
so
thought
I'll
you
let
might
it.
be, Tony.
This is good for him.
You know, every state is going through their process. We've seen a bunch of states that have finalized. Other states are putting out multiple maps. At the end of the day, I think we wind up picking up seats just through redistricting.
Yes.
And just through redistricting, not
Like
counting
how,
what we pick up.
single digit, double digit?
I think probably single digit, because there are still Democrat states like New York.
It could be double.
It could be, but I think there are still some Democrat states like New York that are still, you know, they could move it around where you can basically off a couple of Republicans in the districts, depending on how they do it. But we don't
Here in
need,
Illinois? Yeah.
Yeah, right. We don't need, we really don't need more than 10 seats just from redistricting to gain control again. So I think that bodes well for us. It's kind of like, you know, you're in a sailboat, and either you have a stiff wind at your back or you don't. And redistricting is certainly one of the pieces of that stiff wind we have heading into 2020.
Republicans do three things really well, right? They do redistricting.
Beat Democrats.
They do 2018 and 20. They do redistricting.
2010, 2014.
They do redistricting really well. I mean, really, really well. I think in North Carolina, they potentially, that map could go from 9 Republicans to 13 or something like that, or 11. Anyway, look it up. They do redistricting really well. They do disinformation really, really well. I mean, like, what? And then they do brand.
Democrats never do
And
disinformation.
the third thing they do really well, and I have to admit it, is they do branding. They brand the Democrats really well. I mean, they just do a better job than how we brand them.
And even when
it hurts us.
But even when you see reforms in redistricting, for instance, voters in Virginia overwhelmingly approved turning it over to an independent commission.
How's that working out?
That has just collapsed, and it's working out great for the Republicans.
Yes.
So,
The
anyway.
same thing in Florida. Fair districts.
Right.
And we're going to wind up picking up,
I mean,
not only the seats
like,
we're going to pick up by adding
I mean, when you take
but
a look at,
redistricting.
for example, even in, I think both 18 and 20, if you look at every, congressional district, and the Democrats beat in total vote, it's kind of like the national vote versus the electoral vote, and how that should extrapolate out in terms of the number of seats we have. It's ridiculous how many number of seats we don't have because of redistricting.
Anyway.
Thank you, supercomputers.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, so I'm Sanjay Srivatsan, a first year at the college at the university, and my question is about liberal states in the Northeast and Maryland. So when you have states like Vermont and Maryland, where there's popular Republican governors, but the states are very liberal, is it a possibility that if the governors run for Senate, that they can still win, or has our nation become too partisan for that?
Well, I think this is what makes America great. Vermont, the bluest of blue states, Massachusetts, Maryland, they all have Republican governors. My clients, John Bel Edwards in Louisiana, has a Democratic governor. Roy Cooper won twice in a Trump state of North Carolina. This just shows, Virginia is a plus 10 state that just went for Youngkin. I mean, the fact is that there's not a state, Kansas has a Democratic governor, right? There's not a state out there that can't, in the right circumstances, in the right environment, and to your point, the right candidate. Doug Jones won his Senate race in Alabama. It might have been short-lived. This stuff can really happen.
As far as your question, the people who govern those states being a governor is different than being a senator. I think John would
Like a
agree.
big mayor.
Yeah, it is. It is a lot about job approval. It is a lot about how you get things done for people, the perception of how you do your job. People don't really know what senators do. They don't follow legislation, but they know if their roads, are clean and all the rest of that stuff. And I think Hogan and Baker and the guy in Vermont, I can't think of his name off the top of my head. That's Scott, right? Oh my God, that's horrible. Old age. But I think they have forged a combination of job performance and cult of personality, if you will, that kind of insulates them from
And they're
the
moderates.
partisan.
If you have moderates in your party.
The truth of the matter is maybe Baker is, but
Scott is.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, they agree, 70% with most Republican things, more than they agree with anything the Democrats do. But they're not perceived to be ideological.
Right.
That's the key for them.
Just as a hypothetical, suppose before the 2022 election, Donald Trump is indicted for seditious conspiracy, and the indictment lays out credible facts. What would be the effect on the 2022 and 2024 election? Like, you could imagine that could be a signal for Republicans to abandon Trump,
Or to rally behind him.
or Trump could pull a Eugene Debs and be elected president from jail. So which would it be?
So we're pollsters, so we're too linear for hypotheticals, but I'm going to give that one to you, and then I'll.
Thank you very much. I don't even.
I don't think it matters. I'll help you. I don't think it matters.
Listen, Donald Trump has a core of supporters who are going to support him no matter what. That core may wane over time, but the fact of the matter is right now, there has been little to no erosion of that core. There really hasn't inside the Republican Party.
Right.
He went through 2 impeachments. He didn't lose his core support. I hate to say this, and I'm going to get booed by the audience, but everything that's going on in D.C. with January 6th, did anybody see a January 6th impact on the Virginia governor's race and the New Jersey governor's race? No. So voters have the capacity to look beyond and vote what their interest is at that moment in time.
Well, I think voters also have the capability of literally looking like this. I mean,
Yeah,
and
but
I
they're
don't mean
not
that to
blind.
be a smartass.
No.
I mean, there is a universe of voter who clearly is putting their head in the sand about facts, or
So-
and the fact is, I think that it could embolden his supporters. I think that there's a universe of supporter that they're worried about not getting out. Like, for example, in January of 19, when you had the runoff elections in Georgia, without a doubt, there was a drop-off in Republican voters because Trump wasn't on the ticket. And then in Virginia,
He was also urging Republicans to not come out.
Right, but again, the fact is I will still lean towards these people are coming out.
But Tony, what you're saying, I don't mean to put words in your, but are you saying that no matter what, for instance, the January 6th committee comes up with, no matter who they subpoena, no matter assuming whatever documents?
What I'm saying is a lot of that stuff is baked into the cake. It was baked into the cake. And it didn't impact Republican turnout. It didn't hurt Republicans' chances. You know what I'm saying? It's just like the first impeachment. You know what I'm saying? I mean, everybody thought that the first impeachment was going to be, I think John and I would both agree that the first impeachment, by the time we got to November of 20, was like, that was so far in the mirror behind. So many things had happened. And the same is going to happen here too. So I don't see him losing his base that easily as people think it is. It's not that easy to shake free from him.
He's still the guy, the one thing he said, he's still the guy who says he could go down Fifth Avenue and shoot someone. And this is coming true. I mean, the litany of things against him, this is really coming true.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Graham. I'm a first-year student at the Harris School of Public Policy. So you guys both talked about how certain people aren't real Americans, academics, people in Washington. People talk a lot about you Chicago people as not being real Americans. I was born here. I lived here my whole life. Do you think there's any future where people stop talking about academics or educated people as not being real America, or Chicago not being real America?
And goes to also James Carville, who talks about, faculty lounge politics and that sort of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think we said that up here, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that there is a universe there's things that happen in DC that are, there's a gap. There's a gap between what they're thinking is real and is a narrative and what, whatever, real people. When I mean real people, outside of literally this bubble of Congress and political elitists, right?
Give me some examples.
Well, one other thing before I forget is I think Twitter's not real, right? I mean, like, if you take a look at what's going on Twitter versus, again, the percentage of people in America who actually look at it, whatever, there can be this disconnect. And, I think the disconnect is the biggest problem. I think that there's a disconnect between, Congress, Democrat, Republican, whatever, and the political elite that run DC, and what's going on. Like, I live in Montgomery, Alabama. He lives in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, right? Like, he lives in a Democratic place. I live in a Republican place. That's probably pretty good for your pollster, right? Right. We have a little bit of reality check. And I watch no cable TV. Never seen Jake Tapper, never seen Rachel Maddow, never seen Chris Cuomo.
I don't watch Fox.
And he doesn't watch Fox. I guess my point is I'm worried about the disconnect.
No, I couldn't agree with him more. I will say the following, and I don't believe we said you people in Chicago or anything like that. I don't believe we disparaged in any way, but there is a segment of the American voting public, the voting population, who feel that they are looked down upon and that they have been looked down upon by the elites in Washington who make fun of them because of what they believe, because of how they believe it, because of how they worship, because of all of those things. And I will tell you, it is the undercurrent. It is what Donald Trump tapped into very early on in his presidential campaign. And that is what people do not understand. That group of people who feel like they are looked down upon, whether it's directly through words or through a disconnect with values, is really the long-term problem I see for the Democrats.
And how does race figure into this?
Oh, well, first of all, there is such a huge disconnect between white and African-American opinions on racial justice in this country. There just is. I'm sure John saw this, during the defund the police argument during the campaign, even white Democrats didn't want to defund the police. You know what I'm saying? And the attitudes towards the police and the violence was just so disconnected. I don't know how you put that back together when there's a reality, not a reality, there is a perception among white voters that is totally disconnected by the reality that African American voters live. And I don't know how you bridge that. I don't know. Maybe you have some suggestion, or you've seen something in your data, but I certainly haven't seen anything that does.
Well, I'll take it one step farther. There's a disconnect often between how policymakers believe African Americans or people of color think on policy.
Absolutely.
If you're a pollster for 30 or 40 years, you kind of understand that African Americans are some of the most, on different issues, some of those moderate to conservative voters out there. Yep. And so there's also this wrong narrative about, what African Americans believe or what Latinos believe, et cetera. Latinx is a perfect example. No Latino or Hispanic wants to be called Latinx. It became this thing that was created by this, I don't even know who it was. We asked the question, Latinos want to be identified by their nationality. I'm Colombian, I'm Cuban, I'm Mexican, et cetera. So we come up with these disconnects even when we're trying to represent a minority or person of color. It's strange.
Let me tell you, to underscore that point is, one of the stories that came out of 2020 was that actually Trump did better with Hispanics than he had done previously.
And also Virginia, the
the
exit
two exit
polls
polls were different, But they did better.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Oh, he
whether
did
it was
better.
a
We
woman-
know, our internal polling,
Right,
he
right,
did
he
better.
did.
Like Youngkin, McAuliffe
did better, yeah.
underperformed.
And by the way, in our polling in New Jersey, Chitterelli was doing better with Hispanics than the previous Republican candidate had done. But one
Because
of
the
things-
Democrats have considered this identity politics, or
No, I don't think.
Economic.
I actually think it's probably more about what the Republicans are doing than what the. You know what I'm saying? That's my take on it. I think it's very economic.
If you go back to February of 2020, before coronavirus, if anybody take your minds back to that day where there was no masks, no vaccines, you know, and you could actually fly in an airplane and eat a bag of peanuts without having to worry about the person next to you yelling at you to put your mask back on. In February, I had delivered a set of numbers to Trump. And at that time, we were getting in the mid to high teens among African-American votes. And we were in the mid 40s with Hispanics. And it was primarily powered by African-American men
younger
and Hispanic men. And it was economic based. They had finally felt the impact of the economic growth, and they were responding to it. And now, of course, COVID came along, and a lot of that, you know, shattered and went away. But it's this misconception, as John said, that there's only one way to reach these voters, and they only respond to one message, when in fact, there are many ways to reach them and many ways to get them.
Yeah, if you're in D.C., I swear to God, I mean, I've had this fight a million times. It's like, you know, you believe that if you're talking to Latinos, they only want to hear about immigration. One of the weakest issues among Latinos is immigration. Not that they're not, you know, they don't believe in dreamers and pathway to citizenship and all that type of stuff. Guess what the top issues are? Just like any other Caucasian, you know, it's economics, and it's healthcare, and it's education, right? And so again, there's this disconnect in terms of, you know, how we communicate. And I don't say just this isn't just a Democrat but how, you know, people communicate, what the narrative becomes about certain demographics, including non-college whites. You know, like you can take almost every demographic group, and there is almost a kind of a targeting narrative that is often wrong.
Yes. Leave it to Washington to get everything wrong.
Hi, my name is Sophie. I'm a third year in the college studying public policy, and I have a question particularly for you, Mr. Anzalone. I've just been listening to the coverage, and everybody's talking about the gubernatorial races in Virginia and New Jersey as this blowout, and it's a horrible sign for Democrats, and you yourself kind of said that tonight. But I'm just curious, in the New Jersey race, it was the first Democratic governor to win re-election in 44 years. The race in Virginia was only a 3-point margin. It didn't seem like a blowout to me, and Democrats just won huge in California. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit more to that narrative of it being such a disaster, and if you think it is, why?
Well, I mean, the reality is that a loss is a loss, right? I mean, the fact is that if Virginia is a +10 Biden state and you lose by 3, it's a 13-point swing. I mean, that's really rough. It's hard to lose a +10 state. Really hard.
It's almost as hard as losing a +16 state, which they almost did in New Jersey.
Right, which almost in New Jersey.
And by the way, in New Jersey, in Virginia, I saw an analysis of the spend, and McAuliffe and Democrat-aligned groups outspent Youngkin and the Republican-aligned groups by about $2 million.
But, and isn't part of the problem too that you mentioned California, that a lot of Democrats nationally saw what happened in California, so they just assumed
that's a super big problem.
It's all about Trump.
I mean, you know, it's just a super big problem because there wasn't an alternative for Newsom. Newsom's job rating was like 58% by the time that vote came. His, you know, opponent became kind of clownish, right?
Larry.
Right? You know, and the fact is, and Youngkin was real, and he ran a real campaign, and he wasn't scary, and he had a good message.
And by the way, that is a +30 Democrat state, and one of the things that they did very effectively there, and he knows this, is they recognized that they had an enthusiasm problem.
Yeah, and they went out there
and
and worked.
they worked it really, really hard.
But Newsom in the campaign did a better job of branding Elders. Is that his name?
Larry
Right. I mean, just like every campaign's different. But I'll tell you what. In the 30 years I've been polling, I've never used California as a bellwether, except for like coffee or Netflix or things that are right. I have 4 kids. That's helpful. Like what are you seeing in California? But the fact is that it was a rough night for Democrats, and no, we're not going to again put our head in the sand. But I do believe that we have what we need to be competitive. Is it going to be easy? No. Is a lot of this atmospherics? Yes. And can you change the atmospherics? Well, we certainly hope some of that happens naturally, but you also have to take destiny in your own hand and have a heck of a message to tell people what you're going to do for them.
By the way, the point I was making about the difference between New Jersey and Virginia is while the Democrats outspent the Republican by about $2 million in Virginia, there was a $6.5 million gap in New Jersey.
Right.
And if that had not existed, that race may have been different there too.
And we really should focus, if you're doing an analysis of the political environment and economic environment, it should be Jersey. And here's why. One, there was a real race in Virginia. And it's right next to Washington, D.C. So everything, it's like it gets polluted, et cetera, et cetera. You had Terry McAuliffe, who was quasi-incumbent, yada, yada, yada. Jersey, you have the first most expensive media market in America, New York, and the third in Philadelphia. And so the communication is really short. And so a lot of what was happening there was atmospherics and not so much just about what they were doing. And so the true analysis of what's probably happened in 2021 should probably be a little bit more focused on Jersey. Damn it.
Thanks. We're beginning to sort of come, I think, to the end of our time, but I think we have...
But there is a pub downstairs.
Right. But we have time for 1 or maybe 2 more questions.
As long as John and I aren't long-winded in our responses.
Right.
Yeah, I think there's 2 of us here. Is that right? Unless there's anyone. Can I lower my mask to speak into the microphone? Hi, so I'm Rory. I'm a master's student here with the Committee on International Relations. So the fact is, midterm elections are always hard for the party that's in power, and Biden's approval rating, according to Gallup 2 days ago, is 38%. I'm interested to hear from both of you, starting with John Anzalone. What do you think the chances are that a year from today, the Republicans control the House and the Senate? And then, Mr. Fabrizio, I'm interested to hear from you as well.
I would go to 538 or RCP to see your average, right? That's really the better place because they aggregate and et cetera. So it's probably a little over, it's 43% I think today, et cetera. Okay. So, I mean, I'll take the 5 points, brother, right? And I think that, given where we are with the, the political environment and the Biden job rating, I don't think that there's any one odds maker in DC or Vegas who's going to say, that there's great chances that that the Democrats are going to keep the House. I think we have a better chance in the Senate just because of those dynamics and the candidates matter, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we will be competitive. But I don't think there's anyone out there who doesn't believe that the Republicans have a pretty decent advantage going into the 2022 elections. And I'm not going to lie about it.
For me, I would put our odds of taking back the House 85% plus, 90% plus. Yeah. In terms of the Senate, I think the Senate's a little bit trickier. But I would say that our chances of taking back the Senate are probably about 60%. I'm bullish on our chances.
I love that.
Yes, I know. You want to disappoint me on Election Day in 2022. But I'll be here to have a shoulder for you to cry on in 2022.
All right.
Thank you both.
Okay,
You're welcome.
great.
Hi, Zach.
Tony, great to see you. I'm Tony's ambassador. This is Zach Brand, second year at Harris. John, this is for you. Thank you so much for coming. We've had enough of Tony. We need to hear his perspective.
I can never get enough of Tony.
I don't blame you.
I love this guy.
I'll keep this short because that was basically what my question was. But really, I think a lot of people question Democrats claiming that the infrastructure bill that we just had passed is a victory because it was fairly bipartisan. How are the Democrats going to address this I think this last election, a lot of it was a failure of messaging. How are they going to better address this going into 2022 if economic conditions either get worse or don't change? Because it seems like there's going to be a lot of difficulty getting any sort of Biden's agenda or the more progressive agenda passed because they're going to risk being not.
So
really.
I think, to be fair, when you're in an off year of the midterm, it's not as if there was a Democratic message. Like, right, you have two candidates, one in Virginia and one in New Jersey. And so I think it's a little unfair, not just by you, but by the media, et cetera, that there wasn't a message. I think that what really hurt was for the last 2.5 months, we've been talking process. You know, the sausage is being, everyone's seeing the sausage be made in a very diverse party where you have the Cinnamon Mansions and you have the AOCs and J. Pauls, et cetera. That is ugly. That is really, really ugly. I think I laid out what I believe is going to be really strong messaging in 2022. And I think that, again, being able to say what we have done for people is going to be really important. I'm not so much talking about the infrastructure bill, but I'm talking about the things that I believe are going to impact working families. But quite frankly, if you're Haley Stevens in Michigan, which has the worst roads in America, and you're able to talk about roads and the fact that $10 billion or whatever it is coming to Michigan, there might be some value to that as well.
I think, sorry, I didn't articulate it clear enough. Is anything else going to get done that Democrats can do as victims?
I mean, I think that we're going to have this bill that lowers health insurance costs, lowers prescription drugs, elderly care, child care, et cetera.
And is that it? No voting reform, no.
I mean, you know, you all may want more, but I don't know what else is going to get done. But I'll tell you, the big things that are going to impact people and lower their household budgets is pretty tremendous.
The new White House comms director sitting to my right here. Can I leave on one thought? Or was there another question?
Yes.
Oh, no. One thought. In the eventuality, I am right and John is wrong, and 2022.
About which thing?
About the elections in 2022.
Okay. I wasn't.
We're right about everything else.
I said you had the.
No, wait. If in the eventuality that's the case, I think looking beyond 2022, I think here is the real challenge for Democrats, in all seriousness. If they lose the majority, the people that lose are going to be the moderates in their party or the more practical liberals that are in marginal districts. Which means
you don't have it.
That the caucus, I didn't say we did, which means that the caucus, the Democratic caucus in the House, the progressives are going to have a larger voice. And if they lose the Senate is going to look at the House. The House is going to be looking at the Senate, and it's going to become even more problematic. Now, there is an opportunity there. That opportunity would be for President Biden to triangulate from his own progressives, much like Clinton did back in the 90s, where he was able to triangulate himself between the Republicans and his own party to make himself out to be a true centrist.
No, BIF.
Yeah.
Okay, you said the challenges. Here's your challenge of the Republican Party.
I can't accept
At some point, the Republican Party is going to have to stand for something and have literally an economic
stronger borders,
an economic
lower
plan.
taxes,
because I'll tell you, I actually believe the wedge issues
beating up on China
are playing themselves out because they didn't work against Biden. Am I naive enough to believe that they don't work? I really do. But at some point, they're going to play themselves out, and people aren't going to believe it.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and call time here.
Time out.
And thank you both for an absolutely fascinating evening. And we'll find out who's right a year from now.
Thank you.
Oh, and thank you all for being with us this evening.